welcome to episode 255 of Cinematary. I'm your host, Zach Dennis, and I'm here with
Lydia Creech,
Miranda Barnwell,
Reid Ramsey.
And joining us for the first time on the podcast, you may have read his writing that burns through buildings as coolly as Godzilla and Godzilla Kings of Monsters. Logan Kinney, thank you for coming on the podcast and joining Cinematary.
Thank you for letting me be here. I'm so sorry in advance. This is going to be horrible.
Well, we got a perfect movie to talk about in part one to kind of get you antiquated. So
phenomenal! Can't wait.
Well, we got our movies that we saw this week in part one. Part two, we'll be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1939's The Rules of the Game. But let's go ahead and jump into movies that we saw this week. And we'll jump in immediately with probably the most talked about movie. It didn't make as much money as the one we're about to
talk.
Exactly, with some more talk. But it didn't make as much money as the one we'll talk about next. But we'll start first with Midsommar, the latest from Ari Aster. It was a little bit mixed on the Cinematary crew when it came to Hereditary last year. But this is Ari Aster's follow-up to that. It stars Florence Pugh, as well as Jack Rayner, William Jackson Harper of The Good Place, and then Will Poulter, and then a lot of Swedish people, not named Skarsgård, which was very confusing. But pretty much the gist is that this couple and their friends travel to Sweden to visit one of the friends' hometown and attend this Midsommar solstice festival. And naturally, it starts going off the rails and becomes a very bizarre pagan cult ordeal.
Things don't go great.
Things do not go great. Lydia, you were not a big fan of Midsommar. I'm curious, real quickly, how did you feel about Ari Aster kind of going into this in terms of like Hereditary, and then did Midsommar change anything, or are you still kind of feeling the same way about him?
I was one of the people in Cinematary last year who thought Hereditary was dumb, annoying bullshit, and I think I was not helped in my impression of this by just like the way Ari Aster talks about horror films and genre and who he cites his influence and what he thinks he's doing. I just mean, dude, shut up. But my impression, again, has not changed. I'm like very clearly for Midsommar, Ari Aster's like seen The Wicker Man, he's seen The Shining. But I don't know if he likes these movies actually. You know what I mean? And
I think he likes his movies.
Yes. And I'm upset because I thought I would like Midsommar. There are things in there that are extremely my shit. But not the way he's doing it.
Yeah, I guess kind of to tease our Patreon episode for we talked about white elephant art versus termite art for our first book club episode, and I think that in the discussion of white elephant art, Ari Aster really like lines up with that, where the images you like throughout the film are so impeccably staged that there's really just no like, I mean, they're so impeccably staged, there's just no meaning. Like you're just seeing these images that kind of,
well, the only meaning, what pisses me off,
you're good,
or one of the things that pissed me off was like these images of this like weird cult art that's just like all over the walls. Like, I mean, it's fairly obvious when these American students are tromping around in this other culture's religious holidays, like, okay, things are gonna go bad, but like, oh my god, it's so signposted. And like Ari, I think, thinks he's being very funny about it. I think the joke that either really worked for people or was really annoying for people was like this tapestry of just weird shit incoming, like a lady cutting off her pubic hair and like baking it into food and feeding it to someone, and like clearly it's absurd and grotesque and like ha, but like what the fuck, Ari? Like what does this mean other than like what I'm looking at? Which, by the way, I don't like it.
It takes forever to do anything as well. It takes forever to do anything. Like, they throw themselves off of rocks, and then there's just 30 minutes of nothing in between. It's like, oh, wow, these crazy cults. I guess we're just gonna stay, because, okay, sure. And then they go for dinner, and then there's these perfectly immaculate overhead shots of them eating dinner that happen like 3 times in the movie, and they don't mean anything once.
But all those triangles.
Yeah, it's just like, wow, shapes, you know? They mean things.
And he's very obsessed with like the concept of like holding time and holding you within the shot. But again, the image doesn't mean anything, so you're just sitting there watching these people wait to start eating or wait to start drinking, and there's just nothing palpable in what you're seeing. I think that you just have all of these it's constantly trying to, like you said, Lydia, kind of get this reaction out of you, whether it's grossed out or whether it's frightened or whether it's shocked. You know, it's just constantly trying to elicit a reaction, but none of the reactions feel natural. It feels so like he's configured it in this way and is kind of anticipating you to react in this way. And so it doesn't, there's not really any, in the same way with Hereditary, there's no real horror in it because it feels so manufactured for you to react in that sense. It's not letting you develop anything or let the scenes breathe in their own way. And so you kind of feel like you're supposed to, like you're being led around in a similar fashion, and after 2.5 freaking hours of it, you're just kind of, beat down by it. Logan, I know you had a very adverse reaction to this as well. I'm curious, kind of elongated, what you felt about Midsommar.
Okay, well, to kind of expand on that point, firstly, the camera work, whenever the camera moves, it moves in the worst possible ways consistently. Whether it's the unnecessary tracking shots in the field that go on for like 3 continuous minutes for no reason and add nothing visually, to like the awful B-roll camera flip when they're driving across the road and they just turn upside down. So you see the trees and the road upside down for a minute. Absolutely no other reason than to be cool. Like, there's a ton of these really show-offy camera tricks that actually look really bad, and they're clearly just trying to show off the increased budget he has, because this is the second film. He can do anything. And instead of doing something interesting, he's just being like, look at me, I can do a flip. Woo! And it's just I'm so bored of that kind of shit. But mostly I just think it's pointless. I think there's nothing to it. I don't think it's scary or atmospheric. It's definitely not a fulfillingly thematic movie about the nature of humanity or trauma or the disintegration of relationships. It's all just kind of pointless and agonizingly long and pretty offensive on a lot of moral levels, honestly. Not in a particularly interesting way, just in a kind of just disgusting and kind of icky way that makes you want to just go home and take a shower.
In like screenwriting 101, one of the things you learn is like you state, for doing a spec script or 3-act structure, whatever, it's like you should state the theme of your movie within the like first 10 minutes or something. And at one point at the beginning, Christian just screams, "I don't know what I'm doing." And I was like, oh, okay.
There is a zoom in of a shot on a computer that says "goodbye" full stop to emphasize that something bad's going to happen. It zooms in. They press the zoom button on a laptop screen for goodbye. And this is a critically acclaimed movie in 2019. I knew it from that second I was going to die.
Hey, I went and saw this at an AMC theater, and they called it an AMC artisan film. So this is an AMC artisan film. Watch how you talk about it.
Look, nobody can talk about it in a worse way than its own director talks about it. I mean, going back to him being super annoying as a personality, he has stated on the record that he made this film like going through the midst of a bad breakup. And I'm like, if we are viewing it through this lens, like, how the fuck do you think you're the grieved party, Ari?
Yeah, so is he Florence in the situation?
He's clearly the Florence character, because I'm like, yeah, because if you set your ex-girlfriend on fire in a movie that you made about setting up all this scenario to like get back at a shitty ex, if that were your ex-girlfriend, that would, how that would look. You're doing a shitty thing.
Yeah, no, they wouldn't have gotten away with the sex. It's a rape scene. It's a rape scene in Midsommar. Jack Rayner, he's drugged and coerced and he's obviously afraid the whole time. If that was a woman, then no one would defend this movie, I feel. Because it's like, there was a point in High Life earlier in the year, which I didn't like very much. But the comparison of, there's 2 rape scenes in that movie, and I think both are really unnecessary. But the one where the man is raping the woman is framed as animalistic and horrifying, as it is. And then the one where Juliette Binoche rapes Robert Pattinson is framed as more alluring and sensual and kind of filled with mystery and wonder. And it's the same act, just performed differently. And there's a way that people talk about it, and it feels kind of disingenuous to me. And I don't feel like enough people are admitting the fact that the Midsommar scene is of sexual assault, because the movie is definitely not conveying that because of the way it ends immediately after that sequence. It just rubbed me completely the wrong way. I am not a fan of this movie the slightest.
Yeah, it has such a that kind of plays into the way it views just people in this movie. It has such a disinterest in people. I mean, just you think of the way that he kind of discards the different characters. I mean, at one point, Will Poulter just kind of walks away with somebody, and then you don't see him for the rest of the movie.
Well, you see one shot of him with like a Mike Myers style face.
I don't think that's him.
It looks horrible.
I don't think that's him. I think that's somebody wearing his face.
Like him. Well, okay. Well, I don't care.
Well, that's fair.
It's just, it has this complete disregard for people, and I think that's such a weird stance to take, both in this movie and his previous movie Hereditary, which is desperately wanting you to like have this emotional reaction to the trauma these lead characters are facing, but nobody feels like a person. So how are you supposed to elicit empathy for this like not person? Like it's just kind of this almost like under the skin like husk, it's like, it's not even I don't know what to call it,
It's like a PS2 background avatar, basically, of all of his characters. They exist like in GTA games to be ran over and killed in various ways, and then you're going to try and put an emotional arc in there because you need to sell it to a wider audience. But it's making a movie about trauma without the knowledge, the insight, or the empathy that is required in making a movie like this. And it really distresses me that stuff like Rob Zombie's work is derided by the general audience when he actually cares about the victims of it in his movies, whereas Ari Aster gets wide releases and big A24 backing for his... It's not even nihilistic, it's just apathetic. Like, there's nothing to it. There's no... It doesn't even seem to take glee in its fight. Like, Hereditary seemed to take glee in it, which is at least something. There doesn't seem to be anything to Midsommar. It's just kind of there, and then it's over, and then you just feel bad.
Yeah, it's I don't know. I'm just gonna jump off the train of having to watch Ari Aster movies. I'm sorry. It seems like we're gonna get a lot more of them, and
Yeah, no, I give up. Like, I did this. I mentioned this before we started recording, but I watched this movie for the discourse. And I watched it for one reason in particular, and that is because I read the Wikipedia article before watching the movie, because I wanted to know if there was anything that was going to be potentially upsetting that people weren't talking about. There was, for sure, but I think the big thing that no one else seems to have mentioned, and that I think is a really big problem and a really big indicator of Ari Aster's complete contempt for marginalized people, is that the inciting incident of Florence's trauma is to do with her sister with bipolar disorder spontaneously deciding to kill herself and her parents for no reason, and it is totally framed as it's because of her mental illness, and that is not how mental illnesses work, and that is not something that I think you can get away with in 2019. Ari Aster definitely knows better. He just doesn't care. And I think that this is going to do damage to people with mental illnesses, because like, I date someone with borderline personality disorder, and I watched this and I thought, what if they were there next to me? They would feel horrible about themselves, and I just wanted to kick him in the head. I was just disgusted.
And it's just done kind of to, like, illustrate how...
to, like, MacGuffin her to Sweden. It's like, I don't know how to get her there
to an extent, but also to
bullshit.
just show how shitty of a boyfriend Jack Rayner is. And we can find out how shitty of a boyfriend he is without having to go through that whole, 20-minute affair to begin the movie.
It's just so, like, there's no reason for her to be traumatized at all, because it barely comes up. She has one bad trip and one nightmare with some of the worst effects I've ever seen, when, like, the black fog out of her mouth looks horrible. It looks like The Mummy Returns when The Rock turns up as the Scorpion King. It looks like that's coming out of her face. So I don't understand the reason for it. It just seems to, like, another thing to kind of be like shock value. It feels like Ari Aster, and this is kind of proven by his short films, but it feels like he's a big 4chan person. He wants to edge people. He wants to trigger them. He wants to be a fucking dickhead to people. And he's managed to disguise some of these base impulses through kind of like ostensibly elevated horror, but underneath the skin of Hereditary and Midsommar is this constant need to just degrade people that are easy targets to begin with. Like all the shots of the physically disabled person in Midsommar to emphasize that this is fear. And it's similar in Hereditary with the little girl with the facial disability. She gets shot like an other and disgusting. And it's just, we don't need this anymore. This still happens. People are still dying because of ableism. Like, this is not something you could just get away with in the modern climate. Ari, fucking dick.
Well, coming next on A24, it's just going to be like his Avengers, but it's all just, people with weird face disfigurations, and it's going to be like a giant hit. So I apologize in advance.
Ari Aster directs the Umbrella Academy season 2.
Exactly.
I can't believe this has been announced.
Well, Midsommar is in theaters now. If you'd like to check it out, we also have a review that's much more positive than we just gave on the site by Michael O'Malley. So if you are much more of a fan of Midsommar, you can check that out on cinematary.com. I want to jump over real quickly. I don't have a lot to say. I just kind of have one point about Spider-Man: Far From Home, the latest in the Marvel universe. Because I have to go see this because I have to go watch Spider-Man movies as somebody who
it's Spider-Man.
Yeah. And so the one takeaway that I kind of had from this movie, which is relatively forgettable, it's pretty typical Marvel fare, at least of what they've been kind of putting out lately. It's relatively inoffensive, showy stuff. But the one thing that I kind of thought about, and it really made me appreciate more the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, was the kind of crux of this story. Pretty much Peter Parker, who's Spider-Man, he and his friends are on this summer trip to Europe, and naturally he can't just like enjoy a trip. He has to get into crime fighting superhero stuff, and so Jake Gyllenhaal shows up, and Samuel L. Jackson shows up, and whatever. But the main thing that I kind of took away from this is this comes in the twilight of Avengers Endgame, where, spoiler alert for those people who have not seen it yet, which is a big deal, is Iron Man dies in the movie. And so this is really dealing with like the aftermath of that and how people are in this universe are like trying to respond to a lot of the Avengers dying in a number of the events that happened over the course of those two movies. But the thing that bugged me about this is that it feels like it's to an extent trying to set Spider-Man up as kind of the next Iron Man, and in one, the next Iron Man is like kind of the face of Marvel's universe, but also as this kind of wisecracking, very technologically savvy, character. And as in that context with Iron Man, that makes, he is this billionaire playboy who all of his personality quirks and decisions throughout the Marvel movies are kind of contemptible and not really all that charming. As by the time Endgame came around, I was really burnt out and really just kind of detesting everything that Robert Downey Jr. was kind of choosing to do with the character, and it bummed me. It was such a relief. I'm very glad he died. But he still lives on in this movie.
I never want to see him act again. I never want to see another Downey. Yeah, I agree. I think that the most condemning thing about Spider-Man Far From Home is it's a movie about Spider-Man where Spider-Man gets $1 billion drone device that can do anything, including like, bomb people and read their messages, and it's basically an access to all the
Yeah.
satellite system in the world. And his arc is not realizing that's bad,
Yes.
but learning how to use it responsibly. Like, that's the arc. He is learning, and there's a big key moment on a ship where he just uses billionaire technology to auto-generate himself a suit. That's not Spider-Man. That's Iron Man Mach 2. Like, he's like the most diametrically opposed character you could make Iron Man.
And that's what bugs me. That's why I kind of love, watching this movie. I was really loving thinking back on the Sam Raimi movies, because Spider-Man, the character, is very much a blue-collar working-class character. Like, that's his essence. And when you think about those Sam Raimi movies, whether it's him, his mask coming off on the train, or just a lot of that first movie, he's this working class character. He's this blue collar character. He has the scientific knowledge that that compares with Tony Stark Iron Man, but he doesn't follow through with that technological ambition. And the fact that they're kind of shoehorning him into that role in this is just kind of gross, because the narrative of this movie is that Jake Gyllenhaal takes control over all of these killer drones that Tony Stark has put out into space to keep the world safe, which was even more terrifying in a week where I read a story about Elon Musk having so many satellites out in space that astronomers are concerned that they're not going to be able to study stars anymore, because the sky is blotted with Elon Musk's satellites. And so the fact that the thing that he comes to is, hey, you have all of these technological abilities, but you're using them for good, and Jake Gyllenhaal's character is using them for bad. I'm like, no, yeah. Jake Gyllenhaal, they're rebelling against Tony Stark because Tony Stark's a dick.
It's really just proof that the Marvel Cinematic Universe is a lot more conservative than people seem to think, because these movies are they're clearly made by billionaires, and they promote billionaire interest. And you watch these movies about how Spider-Man, a little kid who just wants to save people, is robbed of all the complexity about power being a responsibility, because there's no even a mention to Uncle Ben in this entire movie. That it's not about him protecting people, it's him about basically morphing him into someone that doesn't need to care about people. Like, there's no moment in Far From Home that you will remember at all. There's no moment that defines your being a hero is hard, and you have to make sacrifices, and it's difficult, but you have to do it because you have a responsibility for people that don't have your powers. But he gets everything he wants in Far From Home. There's no sacrifice made. He's just perfect. He does everything right eventually. He makes one mistake and it immediately gets better. No one gets hurt for it, apart from bad people. Like, there's no consequence to anything he does, and that sucks, because Spider-Man is all about consequence. Like, you need to have consequence for him to be interesting. Like, you've just made bland Tom Holland in spandex. Like, I don't want that, thank you.
That's mainly my takeaway from the movie, and it's just kind of, as a fan of Spider-Man as a character, it's kind of a bummer that he's becoming this this stand-in for Iron Man after he was since he's gone. We have to put somebody in that role, because we need somebody to fill the Robert Downey Jr. spot in the Marvel universe. So Spider-Man Far From Home, it's in theaters, but if you catch it on DVD or whatever later, that's fine.
You've probably seen it already if you want to. I feel like,
yeah, just go watch some trailers.
I feel like there's gonna be a big second weekend drop, because I can't imagine going to see that again. Yeah,
I'll be curious to see what happens. Lydia, Miranda, I'm going to toss it over to you all. You caught The Last Black Man in San Francisco. That sounded weird how I phrased that. I apologize.
Kind of some pauses in there. I don't know. I've been seeing trailers for this for a while, but I didn't really know what it was about. Earlier this year, we were talking about it afterwards, and maybe we're misremembering, but we both read a book.
A book called How to Kill a City, and it's all about gentrification. And the author just talks about San Francisco, New Orleans, Detroit, in New York City. And I could have sworn in the San Francisco part, and Lydia agrees, they were talking about two friends making a documentary or a film about
I guess trying to save the story of the last black man in San Francisco is about this guy named and also played by real life the friend Jimmy Fails, who's like fallen in love with this like gorgeous I don't know, Victorian style house.
Yeah.
And there's some family mythology, like it was in his family, his grandfather built it,
in
but
the 40s.
but because of like gentrification, or like his father, it lost it. It got taken out from under him, and it's like this white couple lives there.
Yeah.
But Jimmy feels very strongly. It's like, oh, that's my family's house. That's our house.
Like, he still goes to take care of it. We'll do like some paint jobs on the windows. It's a thing that he and his best friend do. So yeah, he's very attached to the house, and I didn't realize that before even going into it. It's like not just about these two best friends, but like this love affair with his home and your family's history to it.
And like what it means to have a family history and like a generational. But I mean, there's kind of a thing about that,
Yeah.
I guess, that I guess I don't want to give away.
Yeah.
I think what most people are really responding to is like, this is, I think, one of the best looking films
Yeah, it looks really good.
I've seen all year. It's got, like, we were just complaining about how Midsommar has these like pretty composed, brightly lit images, like kind of, they don't feel like anything. And I think there's a lot of feeling in Last Black Man of San Francisco. Like, clearly, the director, Joe Talbot, this has got a bio up that says he's a native San Franciscan. Like, clearly he loves the city, and like he's seeing problems, like obviously people being displaced or construction or the loss of history, like homes being torn down that have been there for hundreds of years or whatever. And he manages to capture all of that. Something felt like it was missing.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's like 2 hours, and it definitely felt that way, at least to me. And I don't know what was that thing that was missing for me.
Because the central friendship, there's another character named Montgomery. Like, that's really lovely. It's just like two best friends, like being supportive of each other.
Yeah.
Monty writes plays. Jimmy's got his house, and like they don't try to tear each other down. Like, they very actively fight against this kind of model of friendship that's all posturing and kind of like being a little bit violent. They're gentle folk.
Yeah, they are.
Now, I'm curious, because I feel like gentrification is kind of a tough topic to like portray and, you know, say something about necessarily cinematically. So do you feel like, kind of coming away from the movie, that it's able to like make some sort of statement that resonates about this issue? Or is it kind of, I don't feel like it just uses it as kind of a jumping off point. But I mean, do you feel like you come away, especially after you read To Kill a City, as like being some sort of artistic statement about this issue?
I think it's really hard to get, because To Kill a City is talking about all these like very systematic, overarching factors, and The Last Black Man in Francisco is obviously like this very personal story, like someone who has been caught up in it, whose family has been affected by like being forced out of a neighborhood. And I think it's helpful to like have that in the background. I don't like the words gentrification. I don't think are ever said, but you know, there's like this predatory real estate agent character. The way people react to Jimmy, like being in that neighborhood, in that area. So it's not like an explicit thing. It informs the background, and you can watch it without, like, I think you can watch it without knowing the history of San Francisco is like one of the most gentrified places in America, and still be aware of it. But As far as like critiquing it as a system and like what you do about that, like no,
Yeah.
I don't know. Jimmy doesn't know.
Cool. Well, it's in theaters now, so it seems like you guys recommend checking it out.
Yeah, and I will say, like, I really liked, what's his name, Joe Talbot, his directorial style. So I think, whatever. I think,
Oh, and the score was so good.
yeah, whatever he does next, I will be on board to see it. So I think there are good things to come from.
Cool. All right, Reid, you caught a, I guess this is kind of a new release. It came out earlier this year. But yeah, tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah, I watched Her Smell, which is the, I guess, fourth film by Alex Ross Perry, and it follows the life of Becky something, who plays kind of like a 90s rock star, essentially kind of punk rock. And it's like kind of a 5-act movie, so you get basically 5 big scenes that are moments in Becky's life that kind of play out in real time. And just to preface like my experience with Alex Ross Perry, I've actually never seen one of his movies because I never really, till this one, because I never really felt like it was something I would like. And then even though he gets acclaim for a lot of his stuff, they always felt like a little bit outside of what I enjoy. But then hearing about this one, it actually felt much more like something I would want to check out, and just hearing about Elizabeth Moss's performance as well as Becky. So I did check it out on Canopy. I think it's also streaming pretty much everywhere, like Amazon and iTunes and stuff. But I found it to just be fascinating because you get thrown into the movie in the midst of Becky's, like, her peak of, I'm sorry, my dog just barked, her peak, like, drug addiction and substance abuse. And it's never specific, but it's very obvious that she is just like, her life is overtaken by substance abuse, basically. And it goes so far as to, like, she has this daughter that she basically neglects completely, and is, for some reason, this daughter is also backstage at her first show in this first scene, or at a show in this first scene, and she's just going insane. She reminded me of Jenna Rollins and actually A Woman Under the Influence a lot, and I think that actually plays for most of the movie. She seems to fit kind of that same role, and honestly that quality as well. But I found, just like from the moment the movie starts, it is just electric for the first two parts, the first 2 scenes. And I don't even mean that in really a good way, but it is like handheld camera. You are just whipping through her consciousness, basically, it seems like, and you're seeing all of her world really quickly. It's very loud. The score is abrasive, and it is one of the most stressful first, like, 45 minutes of a movie I've ever seen, honestly. And then it gets to kind of the third part, or the fourth part, and it starts to slow down, and you realize it's a few years later, and she's left she's in recovery. She's stopped doing whatever she was doing before, whatever addictions she had before. She's quit, and she's just at home, and the movie just takes this like elongated pause and kind of this huge breath. And that's when it really kind of hit its stride, because it's fascinating to watch for a long time. But then about halfway through, you get this moment where this rock star, Becky something, as you've just watched her be all over the place, mentally, emotionally, abusive to the people around her for a long time. And it's not pleasant to watch necessarily, but then you see later this same woman basically who's started to get right in her own head, but also is like, there's this beautiful moment where she sits down at the piano and her daughter asks her to play something. And contrasting to the rest of the movie, Alex Ross Perry just like leaves the camera on one take next to her at the piano, and Elizabeth Moss sings a cover of Heaven by Bryan Adams. And it's one of the most like beautiful and emotional scenes I've seen in a long time, honestly. And it came out of nowhere. It came out of left field for me. But at that moment, it's when this movie kind of clicked. And I think, I don't have a whole lot else to say, but I think Her Smell, just even with the length, it's kind of long at 2 hours and 15 minutes. And with how abrasive it is and loud it is, I think it's a very valuable movie too, because it formally and just thematically, and how it portrays just her life and her struggle, but then also just on an aesthetic level, it is one of the most interesting formal movies I've seen this year, up there with like High Flying Bird or High Life, which I liked quite a bit. Sorry, Logan. But
we're all wrong sometimes. Don't worry.
It's yep. But I would really encourage everyone to seek this out. I think it didn't really get the distribution it deserved, honestly. It only played one theater in Knoxville back in April or May, and I wasn't able to catch it, or maybe more recent than that, but I wasn't able to catch it there. But it is streaming on Canopy for free if you have that. But I thought it was great.
I really like Her Smell as well. I think it's great. That piano scene is one of my favorite scenes of the year, for sure.
Yeah.
I was crying a lot in Her Smell. I was crying for pretty much the entire second half, and like you said, the first 45 minutes especially are very anxiety inducing. I saw it in a cinema for Glasgow Film Festival, and it was in the biggest screen in the theater, and the audio was cranked up, so I was very glad I had my headphones on to kind of mute the sound a little, because otherwise I probably would have had to leave, because it was very overwhelming, and I was very stressed out.
Yeah, between like you're backstage for a few of the scenes, and between just the noise coming from the stage and the score and the talking and screaming or whatever's going on, it's sensory overload.
Yep, it really is. And it's it never, like, there was another, it reminded me of the audioscape of Roma, which I thought sucked, and I thought it was very cluttered for no reason, and that made me really anxious. I was very on edge the whole time because the audio really freaked me out. And I saw that in a cinema as well. And that made me unnerved. Whereas Her Smell utilizes that to its benefit and then softens the audio down. Like in the backstage sequences in the second half, there is audio clutter at points, but it has breathing room because she's learning how to cope with the clutter. And that was really that was a very emotional realization for me when I was realizing that the hectic stuff is still kind of there, but she's learning how to deal with it, and that made me feel a lot better about my own issues with audio. I was just like, oh, I'm a big fan of that movie. I think it's really
that's good. A really good point.
Yeah, well, again, it's on, you can catch the movie. I was almost going to say you can catch Her Smell. You can catch the movie Her Smell on Canopy for free or on other streaming platforms. But we're going to take a short break. We'll be back talking about the rules of the game after this.
Hey, Cinematary listeners, Andrew here. During this break in the show, I'd like to mention that Cinematary does want your money. You can give us your money at patreon.com/cinematary, where you can chip in a small fee of about $5 a month, the price of a fancy coffee, in exchange for shout-outs in every episode, the opportunity to choose movies we cover on the show, and bonus episodes every month, in which we talk about more movies as well as other miscellaneous stuff. In the past, we've just been humbly asking for you to share the show and engage with us, and we would still love for you to do those things. You can tweet us at Cinematary, send us an email, zach@cinematary.com, leave us a review on iTunes, all that stuff. But Cinematary has grown a ton in the past few years due to the hard work of a bunch of writers, myself included, who haven't been paid for their labor, which is sadly a pretty normal thing. We record things and write things for free, you listen to and read them for free, and the only people getting paid are like Apple and Google, which is depressing. So, if you appreciate what we do, if you feel like there's some sort of value being exchanged here and you'd like more of it, help us normalize paying people by going to patreon.com/cinematary and chipping in $5 a month. We would truly appreciate it. Thanks for listening. Now let's get back to the show.
And we are back with part 2 of episode 255 of Cinematarian. In this part, we will be talking about 1939's The Rules of the Game as part of our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series. And as everybody just really enjoys during this series, whenever we get over to the foreign side, it's everybody's favorite game. Zach cannot pronounce foreign names, especially French names. So I apologize. Rules of the Game is... It's another installment. It's directed by Jean Renoir from a script by Renoir and Carl Koch. The film stars Nora Gregor, Paulette Dubost, Mila Parley, Markel Dalio, Julien Corrette, Roland Toutan, Gaston.
We're not doing
Moreau.
that badly.
I know, Pierre Magnier. Just don't interrupt me, and I'll be okay.
Don't point it out.
And Jean Renoir himself. In this melancholy French social satire, Andre is having an affair with Christine, whose husband, Robert, himself is hiding a mistress. Meanwhile, Christine's married maid, Lisette, is romantically entangled with the local poacher. At a hunting party, trusted friend Octave also confesses his feelings for Christine as the passions of the servants and the aristocrats dangerously collide. I like that. That's my mess up. The Rules of the Game was the most expensive French film up to that time, with its original budget of 2.5 million francs increased to over 5 million. When directing the film, Renoir and cinematographer Jean Bacalet made use of deep focus cinematography and long shots during which the camera is constantly moving. Both were sophisticated cinematic techniques in 1939. Renoir reduced the film's running time from 113 minutes to 85 minutes, but even then, the film was a critical and financial disaster. In October 1939, it was banned by the wartime French government for, quote, having an undesirable influence over the young. For many years, the 85-minute version was the only one available, but despite this, its reputation slowly grew. In 1956, boxes of original material were rediscovered, and a reconstructed version of the film premiered that year at the Venice Film Festival, with only a minor scene from Renoir's first cut missing. Renoir initially intended to adapt the classic French play, Les Caprices de Marianne. His company first announced the film as an adaptation. He later said he never intended to directly adapt the play, but only to reread it and other classics of French literature for inspiration. The financial success of La Bête Humaine made it easy for Renoir to secure enough financial backing to form his own production company. In 1938, he founded Nouvelle Édition Française, with his brother Claude Renoir, together with André Swoboda, Oliver Bellieu, and Camille Francois. All five invested 10,000 francs into the company and intended to produce 2 films per year. The company was modeled after the American film production company United Artists, which was formed in 1919 as a film distribution company for independent artists by Charlie Chaplin, Douglas Fairbanks, D.W. Griffith, and Mary Pickford. Renoir rallied his friends in the film industry around the company and got financial support from René Clair, Julien Duvivier, Jean Gabin, and Simone Simon. The Rules of the Game, though, was the only film produced by the company. Because Renoir wanted to allow the actors to improvise their dialogue, only 1/3 of the film was scripted and the rest was a detailed outline. Renoir later said that his, quote, ambition when I made the film was to illustrate this remark: we are dancing on a volcano. During filming, Renoir became disappointed by Gregor's performance. He began to cut her scenes and added new scenes for Paulette Dubost and Mila Parley. French historian Gerald Mast found Gregor's performance to be, quote, as haunting and bewitching as a plastic giraffe. During production, Jay told Renoir he hated his performance as Octave. Renoir offered to replace himself with Michael Simon, but Jay refused because 2/3 of the film had already been shot. Jay asked Renoir to instead remove Octave's scenes, which had not yet been shot. Renoir refused, and throughout shooting, he added new scenes for Octave, which he ended up playing himself. Despite beginning the shoot in love with Gregor, Renoir's infatuation remained unrequited. During the film's production, he ended his relationship with his common-law wife, Marguerite, and began another with script girl Dido Friere, whom he had known for 12 years and was Alain Renoir's nanny. Eventually, Dido married Renoir. The Rules of the Game is remembered as a commentary on the moral callousness of the European upper class and their servants just before the beginning of World War II. While making the film, Renoir knew a new world war was coming. He later said there was a sense of it in film and wrote, "It quote, it is a war film, and yet there is no reference to the war." The sense of doom began just before shooting started in January when Barcelona fell to Franco, and throughout the production when the Prime Minister of France recognized Francoist Spain, Italy annexed Albania, and Adolf Hitler prepared his Polish invasion. Renoir articulated this unmentioned theme of the film by saying, quote, "What is interesting about this film, perhaps, is the moment when it was made. It was shot between Munich and the war, and I shot it absolutely impressed, absolutely disturbed by the state of mind of a part of French society, a part of English society, a part of world society. And it seemed to me that a way of interpreting the state of mind to the world, hopefully, was not to talk of that situation, but tell a frivolous story. I looked for inspiration in Beaumarchais to Marvaux, to the classical authors of comedy." Renoir's son Alain said the film continues to be relevant and popular because it shows the artificial joy of the modern age in contrast to the rules of that of or any age. French film critic André Bazin praised the film's mobile photographic style. He said its depth of field and deep focus mise-en-scène resembled that scene in Citizen Kane and The Best Years of Our Lives. Bazin said, quote, "As a conventional love story, the film could have been a success if the scenario had respected the rules of the movie game, but Renoir wanted to make his own style of drame gay, and the mixture of genres proved disconcerting to the public." Satyajit Ray called it, quote, "a film that doesn't wear its innovations on its sleeve. Humanist, classical, avant-garde, contemporary, I defy anyone to give it a label. This is the kind of innovation that appeals to me." Other notable filmmakers who have praised it include Bernardo Bertolucci, Wim Wenders, Peter Bogdanovich, Noah Baumbach, and Cameron Crowe. How did I do? That was pretty good, actually. I think I hit.
Yeah.
I'll give myself like an 85%.
Cameron Crowe?
Cameron Crowe, I struggled with that one.
Yeah, no, but like Cameron Crowe, that's such a weird fifth pick. Like the other four I get, but Cameron Crowe being inspired by the rules of the game, like, god damn, that doesn't come across at all in his movies.
Well, what did you all make of this movie, Lydia? I'm gonna toss it over to you and Miranda first, because I know you saw this and were a big fan of it, and Miranda was very excited to get to talk about this movie. So I'm curious y'all's reaction to it.
Okay, I'm gonna say it was my first time watching it, but Miranda.
I had seen it a few times before, and I will say my appreciation for this movie wasn't until like the third time I watched it in my Classics of French Cinema class with my fantastic professor, Margaret Flynn. She really opened my eyes to Renoir's work and just everything that was going on in this film. And I think this time when I watched it with Lydia, I forgot how funny it is. Like, and what I also love about Renoir, like, he thinks these people are pretty absurd, but like, you can also tell he cares about these people. He's not mean about them. And I love that about Renoir. So,
I also really liked Renoir's performance. Like, I can't believe people had problems with that Octave character, because the way he just like waves his arm around and like is constantly scheming. And also earlier this year, I'd watched the Robert Altman film, Gosford Park, and I was like, oh, Bob likes this movie.
Bob likes this movie too. Yes. So, yeah.
I was extremely into it.
Reid, had you seen this movie before?
Yeah, I actually first watched it in my intro to film class in college, where, I don't know, I think it was a little bit of like I don't know, I've had a strange journey with this movie because I watched it then and was like 18 and was like, this is considered one of the greatest movies ever, so it's obviously one of the greatest movies ever. And then I got farther away from it and I was like, well, maybe I don't actually like the movie as much as I did. And then rewatching it last night, I was like, shoot, this movie is really, really great. So I've stuck on where I first kind of landed. I thought it was really exciting, which is not what I expected. Like, it's you never really feel like you are in control of what's about to happen, or like what's about to happen. It kind of feels just spontaneous in a way a lot of movies don't. And that's part of what I really appreciated, outside of it just being hilarious. And for Jean Renoir's performance himself, I think Octavius may be one of the best characters. Like, I love him in this movie, so whatever that means to whoever didn't like it.
Yeah. Logan, this was your first time watching it. I mean, did you... I know this is such a canonical film. I mean, did you kind of understand why it kind of gets that reputation after watching it for the first time?
Yeah, I did. The first thing I thought of Gosford Park as well. Like, that was the first thing I thought of when I saw the exterior shots of the house. I was like, yeah, Robert Altman has seen this movie. Yeah, but I don't think I'm not sure if I love it as much as everyone else here does, but I think it's exceptional. I think it's really funny. And I get why it is such a beloved canonical classic, because every shot, every scene feels alive and invigorated in a way that a lot of cinema isn't, especially today, where like there's no flat image in the whole movie. It starts at a kind of frantic pace almost immediately, like the intro with like him and the aviator coming out and getting interviewed. It's shot. It kind of reminds me of Only Angels Have Wings, almost the start of it. Like, it's kind of frantic and beautiful and hectic, and there's this kind of darkened edge to everything, and that kind of continues throughout the rest of the movie. Like, there's always this kind of acidicness to it, but there is that, like, compassion at the core of it. Like, he does care about these characters, even if they are bitter and horrible in a lot of ways. Yeah, it's my first Renoir in general, actually, so I'm not an expert on his filming techniques or his particular idiosyncrasies as a craftsman, but I definitely want to see more after seeing this. Is I guess the most important thing that comes out of it. I want to see the river immediately now.
Well, let's talk a little bit about how he's able to, and Lydia kind of brought it up a bit, how he's able to get the comedy out of this movie, because I mean you have a decent amount of just great lines in the dialogue, but like Lydia said, you have Jean Renoir walking around, always fluttering his hands, constantly moving. There's just this motion on screen, always happening. I mean, I think of like the one scene where they're at the house and it's the first night and everybody's going to bed and people are just like
walking
filtering through the hallway. Nobody's really going to bed. There's a French horn playing in the background. They're all having these conversations, and there's just this constant movement that there's not something like explicitly funny happening, but there's just all these oddities happening at once that make it funny. I mean, where did you all find the comedy kind of in the sequences?
I also think that you mentioned that there was a lot of improvising, so he must have done a really good job casting and like giving his characters like little funny things, like the husband character just like really fucking likes mechanical
He loves his
things.
little mechanical birds.
And like that's really funny. Like it's sweet. Like you were saying, Miranda, it's not like mean, like look at this weirdo, but like it's funny.
It's funny, and I think it's a good question, like the interactions among everyone. It's so quick, so I think of the guardsman, Schumacher,
the
Robert,
German guy,
and then the poacher. Like, just that interaction, the three of them, where they gang up on him, and like they're very clearly in different sects, right? Like upper and lower class, but they both bond over this and like friends, but there's still the understing of
like class proprietary, and like he gets a lot of humor out of that.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's just their interactions, because there are a lot of opposites too, right? And
Yeah, it feels like everybody's constantly bouncing off one another. Like, it's kind of interesting that he had so many, like that the most of this movie was improvised, because that feels almost very modern to kind of have this just rough outline, and then you're just letting people react and interact in a sequence. in a kind of age where that improv comedy is much more the norm when it comes to like, you know, mainstream popular comedies. But here it's not like he leans on that. Like he leans on that, but he's also, again, using some theatricality, using some physicality, and making it so that it's not just people tossing lines at each other. There is just this absurd motion. I mean, the scene, it's a little horrifying, but also funny just because of how pronounced it is when they go out for the hunt and they're just slaying rabbits and crap, what's the pheasants?
Quail. Pheasants, sorry.
I mean, it's just like a massacre.
I will say, the first time I watched this movie, my review was, holy crap, they just killed all those animals. So I've progressed from that review, but that it really wakes you up for sure.
There's a scene like that in Gosford Park as well, right? There's a big hunting scene. Because I was thinking about that as well. It's like, I remember the pheasants in Gosford Park.
There's also like something a little bit sinister about it too, because this is the war film without the war, and like there's all these tensions underneath this hunting party too. So it's like also kind of funny, but you're like, oh, these people have guns.
But they're also just standing there while I don't know, yeah.
Yeah, it's not really a hunt. It's like we're gonna throw the animals out in front of you and you can kill them.
That's how rich people hunt.
Yeah,
that's fair.
There's no dirty work.
Right.
All the work's been done for them. They just want to feel good about themselves, and because they have the money to.
I think that scene in particular, I think, is where the movie gets into kind of its stranger tones, and I think that's where I can feel like it feels a little more like an outline because of scenes like that, because you have like the funny back and forths and visual comedy, and then I find the hunt pretty affecting, and I think it foreshadows obviously something to come much later that's tragic as well. But I don't know, that's one of what I think is one of the strengths of the movie, is that somehow the transitioning from the comedy and the caricatures and the farce it doesn't take it away to transition that to this kind of sadder, like more intense and morally ambiguous moment immediately after, you know?
Something I wanted to point out about the comedy element is how everyone moves. Like, no one moves like a normal human being in this movie. Everyone's kind of jagged or walking too fast or making these kind of extravagant gestures. Like, the biggest example is Renoir, like, in the suit near the end, just kind of flailing around very dramatically. But, like, even, like, in just casual scenes, people just storming in and out of rooms really quickly, or, like...
Is Renoir wearing a bear suit?
Yeah.
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 Okay.
The greatest of all time, truly. But like, there's like a scene at the start where like I think it's Renoir and he's talking with I can't remember which one it is. They all kind of blend together. Sorry, but like the taller lady than him, and they're kind of dancing around and they're using all the environment as like physical props. It's almost like it's a dance movie almost. Like every set, every step has meaning and every purpose. Like there's nothing still. It's always kind of moving, going faster and faster and faster. And so when anything happens and things stop for a bit, it becomes more affecting narratively.
Definitely. I want to talk a little bit about its connection to World War II, because I think in hindsight it's really interesting to like look at the film in that context. Like you mentioned, Lydia, you have all of these kind of underlying tensions between the different parties in the hunting party. But you also just have this, I think the end of the movie has like this kind of, semi-statement that could be made about almost France's involvement in World War II. Just how I'm not even gonna say spoiler alert. This movie came out in 1939, but when Andre is killed, and just the kind of reaction to it is very pulling everybody back together and kind of going back in dignity. It seems very kind of nostalgic for this age, especially that World War II kind of evokes, where it is this like barbaric, heinous, vulgar fighting, but there also is like this, touch of class to it. Like there is like this, this classness, this kind of civility to it.
That was not my read at all. I think. Well,
what did you think?
Well, I think Renoir is fucking furious that they treat his death like. To go back to your point, Reid, about like this kind of this undertone, like we've got this funny, and like this escalation of misunderstandings and people bouncing off of each other, and then it suddenly like it's not funny anymore.
Right, like there are rules to this, but like who are those rules made for? Who did they help, and who ends up getting victimized by them? And in this case, so like Octave and Andre. So like one of the things in this film that, if you speak French, you know this. I took French for a year, and my teacher took French. No. This is something that she pointed out and said, so tu is the informal version of you, and vous is the formal version. And obviously, so in the upper class, you would be using vous, and probably in the lower class tu, and Octave uses tu. So I think for these two, they're not quite...
They're not playing by this like class distinction.
Because they're not servants, but they're not the upper class, so they're kind of moving around, so they don't quite fit in, and
it gets Andre killed.
And
then nobody has any consequences.
Right, it's like, well, it's just an accident. Let's just all go inside.
And I think Renoir is like heavily criticizing that.
I mean, if I recommend the Criterion release of this, if you're able, well, that's probably the one you get. But there's a wonderful introduction.
Oh, it's so good.
Renoir is from the 60s. He does an introduction to this film, and he talks about this is a true story. Somebody set a newspaper on fire in the theater when he was watching this movie, because he said like everybody should get out. So yes, I agree. I think people were he's furious with these people. So, but yeah, I do recommend that as well. But I agree with Lydia's reading. I think he's upset.
Well, I think I don't necessarily think he is saying that he agrees with those people, but the way that they kind of just brush off the death and kind of move forward. I mean, that's and maybe my point's kind of aligning with what you're saying, but that seems to be what he in retrospect, kind of how that's how the French kind of came out in the war. They tried to kind of retain that dignity, even though I don't think really France really retained much dignity after World War II. And so it's just kind of an interesting in retrospect that he kind of had that perception to at least to implement on that.
Yeah, it's kind of all about maintaining image in the face of crisis, which is exactly what France did in World War II. Like, this because they gave up very quickly to keep the image of Paris and the image of the high life intact, while not really caring as much about the smaller towns that were still being affected by the war. It is all kind of about kind of disregarding the people that aren't as important for the sake of those that they deem are. And I think it's really interesting that the movie opens with Andre, and then it kills him, and then he's barely important anymore. He just kind of fades out. The ostensible protagonist of this narrative fades into irrelevance as soon as he stops being useful. And I think that's really scathing, and a conscious choice by Renoir, because I don't think he would have done that if it wasn't for a larger thematic aim. And I think that may contribute another reason why audiences weren't as fond of it, because it does kind of disregard narrative rules. It kills the protagonist in almost a comical sense, even though it's heartbreaking, and it's never really... There's no consequences for it. There's no resolution. There's no satisfying payoff. It's just... He just dies, and they keep on living, and things just end, and nothing is resolved properly. And that feels really better to me, and really kind of resonant for the time. It feels like Renoir is on this precipice of saying something about how the world is going to be, and how many people are going to die in the next few years, and how little people are going to care until it starts affecting them. So I really think that's an interesting structural way in adding to the thematic element of the movie. And it made me think a lot higher of the movie, actually.
Yeah, and I think it's important, like, who pulls the trigger, too. Like, when we're looking at it from a class viewpoint, like, it is the people that have just been discarded by the shoot, I can't remember the main guy, the homeowner's name, but it's
Robert.
Yeah, it's Schumacher and Marceau, and they, like, there's obviously they're complicated things following it, but they are the ones that pull the trigger, and it's not like they're really even, I don't know, it's a weird kind of pitting the class against Andre, who doesn't really belong in either class necessarily. He is in the middle, like y'all mentioned. And I don't know, I find that interesting in terms when you're looking at class as well.
Yeah, no, that comes across as very, very on purpose. I feel that was probably controversial at the time. I cannot confirm or deny, but it seems like something that might have pissed people off. And then everything happened. So that's not really an element that is discussed in terms of the controversies of this movie, because it would seem kind of strange now, almost, because it was on that cultural precipice. A thing that this movie reminded me of, and I said this before recording, and I can't remember if I've already said it, but especially in the second half where they're all moving around the inside of the mansion, it reminds me of Clue. Like that kind of energy of these rich people desperately trying to maintain a form of control and order, and having it all kind of fall apart because they can't get along, and because they're all out to get each other pretty much. There's these so many conflicts that none of them can really come together in a cohesive way to make things work, and someone ends up dead for it. Like, and that reminded me of Clue as well. I love Clue, so that's a very high compliment.
Miranda, I'm curious, kind of looking at Renoir, I don't know how much of his work you've seen, but kind of where this ranks for you and kind of sits in terms of his output in your mind.
I've seen, I think, 3 or 4 of his other films, and this one I've seen them like a few times. The other ones I've only seen once, and I'm actually considering reviewing those films again and other ones. But yeah, this is definitely, I would say, my favorite.
You were recommending to me if I were interested in going watching more Renoir, the film he made right before this?
Yes, before this one, La Bête Humaine. It's about this train conductor, I believe. I don't know if I can't remember if I've actually watched that one, so I started watching it the other day. I have this problem. I have like 7 movies that I've started and I just haven't finished it. But that also had a really interesting introduction. But yeah, I've heard good things about his silent films as well, and I don't know where you can get a hold of those, but yeah, I also do like his films with, I think what is his name? He's in Odu Saved from Drowning, which is really good. And then Grand Illusion I like as well. But I think I like just the complexity of this movie. And I mean, okay, so big shocker. Robert Altman's my favorite director. So I really like films that have like an ensemble cast, and I like people interacting and what those interactions cause one person to do. So I would be pretty safe to say this will probably be my favorite Renoir just because of that. But that doesn't necessarily mean I don't like the other ones.
Yeah. And we can kind of expand this to the whole group, but I mean, I know you've seen it so many times and appreciate it. I mean, why, in your estimation, why do you think it does have this reputation as being kind of one of these canonical, movies that people are supposed to see if they're interested in kind of the history of movies? I mean, why do you think it kind of has that place in history?
I mean, maybe just also, I mean, probably part of it too is the fact that it was cut down and its reception to it at the time, and maybe this push by the Cahiers du Cinema directors who I idolize. Renoir, I'm sure, has part
like how it gets cemented in the canon.
Yeah.
I mean, I also think there's a ton of intentionality and really smart thematic work going on. Like, Renoir has a point that he's making.
Yeah.
And it pissed people off, and it's like probably for a good reason.
Yeah.
So like those are films that I think are worth seeking out.
Yeah. And I think it just holds together really well. Like the fact again that he has like a lot of improvisation and like what you said, the bookends were scripted out, but things that happened within the chateau were improvised. I don't know. I don't really see any like moments where I feel like, okay, this could have been left out. It just seems really tight, and I don't know. There's not a moment I'm bored.
Yeah. Well, and we talked about that. It does have this connection to World War II, but it feels kind of like it has this universality where it does. I don't think that it feels dated. Like, I think that it can kind of work wherever. I think that you could probably make a case and find it, comparison to this in modern times. I think it does have this. I think, like his son said, that it kind of has this ageless quality.
Kind of feels like what the Theresa May Donald Trump meeting would be like. It would be like that would be the house they would be in. Like, this is the kind of hectic shit these idiots would get up to, almost. Like,
but less entertaining.
Yeah, no, unfortunately it would not be as funny. And no one got shot, which is also a shame.
Any final thoughts before we kind of wrap up on rules of the game?
I really like the ending. I think it's really great. It stuck with me since I finished it. Like, it's one of those kind of like final sequences that you just kind of sit on. And the more you think about it, the more you reflect on the shot, the more you're like, I get every praise this ever got. I get everything. Like, I guess like it's one of those kind of like, have you ever anyone here seen Exotica, the 1994 movie? Has anyone seen it? Okay, well, you should see it. It's phenomenal. But there's like the last 5 minutes of that movie have stuck with me for the last 2 years, and I think about them pretty much every day. And I think the rules of the game is not quite as emotionally provocative as that movie is, but it has the same kind of feeling of the ending makes everything coalesce, and it has this lingering melancholy that just sits with you and kind of lingers in your chest. And whenever you think about it, the more kind of sad you feel. And it's even though it's about a bunch of really horrible people, and there's not even like, I think the main thing about this movie is that in between class lines there's a combination of assholes everywhere almost, and yet even the fact that these people are all kind of nasty and lying and deceitful, there is that kind of feeling of what could have been. Like, these people didn't have to be this way, this cruelty didn't have to happen, and there's this kind of lingering sadness after it's over, and it doesn't quite sit right with you. And I think that's pretty. It's always pretty impeccable when a movie can do that, elicit that response in a good way instead of a completely unsatisfying way.
I agree about the ending. I think that is, among many things, one of the strengths of the movie.
Well, I believe that will wrap up this episode of Cinematary. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cinematary, on Twitter at handle @Cinematary, on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/Cinematary, and of course, if you would like to support the show on Patreon, we have some wonderful content coming up, so people will definitely want to check it out. But we want to thank our patrons: Will Carroll, Whitney Rio Ross, Tyler Chandler, Ron Hayes, Miranda Barnwall, Matthew Lingo, Maggie, Christopher Metcalf, Chad Newsom, and Cam. We appreciate your patronage, and all of the people who write for the website appreciate it as well. Next week, we will be continuing our Young Critics Watch Old Movies series with 1941's The Lady Eve. I'm excited to do a Preston Sturges movie and dig into that one. So if you have not caught up with the series so far, we've had some great episodes, and including a live episode. So make sure to catch up and jump on. But also go over to cinematary.com. We got some wonderful writing. We have a review of Spider-Man Far From Home and Midsommar if you just were not satisfied with our conversations in this episode. We also have a review of Rocket Man coming from Logan, as well as a rundown of the Edinburgh International Film Festival, where you saw a handful of movies there. We also have a lot of movies that Logan didn't really like, and then we also have a new Cinematary canon list for sweaty movies, and if you are in a place like me, you're constantly sweating when you go outside, so it's very worthwhile to check that out. But yeah, thank you guys for listening, and we will see you next week.